Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I want to talk about a topic that I've been getting a lot of questions on, and that's suspended fish. Uh, suspended fish are probably the most difficult fish to target. Not only do I think that they're hard to locate because they're out floating around in the middle of nowhere, a lot of times I think they're also the most inactive fish, meaning these are fish that are not in an aggressive feeding mode. They're just kind of sitting out in the middle of nowhere. And therefore, because of that, they're not generally going to be a very aggressive fish and an easy fish to get to bite. Now, having said that, if they're out chasing bait fish, they can be in a very aggressive mode. But a lot of times, suspended fish are just isolated, floating around in the middle of nowhere. And because of that, they're not always looking to eat and they're not always interested in the baits that you're going to throw. But we know with the advancement of forward facing sonar and just the angler skills getting better, we're really finding that there are a ton of fish that are utilizing open, expansive areas of vastness out in the middle of nowhere to roam around and to feed and to just kind of hang out. And anglers are getting better at targeting these fish. Now, having said that, though, they are still, in my opinion, the absolute hardest fish to catch and the hardest fish to locate in a lot of instances, especially if you don't have forward facing sonar. But having said that, it doesn't mean you can't catch these fish. So the questions I've been getting have to do more with baits of choice. Like, what are my top baits to go with when targeting these suspended fish? And I've got here a handful of baits. Some of them might be pretty basic and not surprise you. A couple of them might actually really surprise you. But these are the baits that I find to be most useful anytime I'm targeting suspended fish. Now, generally speaking, for me, I like to keep my baits above the fish. I like to think that most fish, when they're suspended, are feeding upward. They like to push bait fish towards the surface because the surface of the water creates a wall, meaning when they chase bait fish to the surface, the bait fish can't go anywhere but left or right or down towards the fish. They can't go higher because they can't get out of the water. So having said that, I like to generally try to keep my baits above the fish. I think that that's a better way to generate strikes versus having baits that are going to sink to the bottom. You can have them follow the bait down, but if you're fishing over 50, 60 feet of water, a lot of times, in my opinion, those fish don't like to chase a bait down that deep if they were 10 feet under the surface of the water. But this is something that uh, it's just one of those techniques, one of those approaches that can be very frustrating. But a lot of times, your biggest fish in the lake are going to be out suspended too. So the rewards can be very, very good for you to put in your time to try to figure out suspended fish. And I think that's why I get a lot of questions regarding how to catch these suspended fish and what baits to use. And that's just simply that people know that these are fish that can be very big. These are fish that are worth them putting in the time, but it's hard to figure out how to go about doing it. So I'm going to share with you these baits. I'm going to ask you guys to share some of your favorite suspended fishing baits as well so that they can learn from you. I'm also going to ask guys that if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you enjoy my channel, please hit that subscriber button. It's something that you can do to help the channel out, and it's very, very much appreciated. Also, if you want to support the channel and you're looking to purchase tackle, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link, which I'll put in the video description. Every little bit that I make from that comes right back to creating content for the channel, and it's also very, very much appreciated. In fact, you can bookmark that link so that your future purchases from Tackle Warehouse will be attributed to it as well, and you don't even have to worry about it remembering in the future. All right, so let's get into these suspended fishing baits. I'm going to start with the first one, which is probably the most basic, and I would think most people would agree that this is a killer suspended bass bait. And that's simply your jerk baits. In this case, this is a Berkeley Stunna. The jerk bait is a dynamite suspended bass bait because the bait suspends. So you can get it down to roughly the depth that the fish are at or within a depth that's within their strike zone and keep it there. This bait's not going to fall out of that range. It's not going to rise out of that range. It's going to stay roughly in the strike zone of that fish. And therefore, it's probably the best all around, all year long bait for catching suspended bass. A jerk bait is just a really good bait at doing that. And remember, the majority of the fish that are out there are feeding on some sort of forage species, your shad, your herring, your cisco, whatever it is that they're feeding on is going to be really, replicated very well based on a jerkbait. So you got to have a jerkbait. That's probably going to be my first choice to use. It's going to be the bait that I'm going to start with in most instances, just to see what I can, what type of reaction I'm getting from the fish. Are they eating it or are they not eating it? So that's the first one. The next one is going to be pretty basic as well, and that's to go with a swim bait, just like this Berkeley hollow belly swim bait. What I'm looking for here is again another minnow or shad imitating bait that I can kind of keep at a specific strike zone. Now, what I will point out is when I'm throwing a swim bait, I'm not going to go with a heavier weight in this instance. I like to go with a lighter weight that allows me really to slow down my retrieve and almost get my bait to suspend at the depth that I think the fish are at. Now, obviously, if they're down 20 feet, I got to go with a heavier head to keep it down in that depth range. But a lot of times I'm going to be choosing a lighter jig head than I normally would if I'm just fishing down a ledge or fishing some piece of cover, because I want it just to kind of float through the water column. A lot of times, in fact, I'm actually tight lining this or pendulum fishing it where I throw it out, I just engage my reel, and I'm just kind of letting that bait slowly hover back and glide back to where I'm at in the boat. And I'm, once it gets down to a specific depth, at that point, I might slowly start reeling it to try to keep it at say 15 feet down. But a lot of times I'm just tight lining it. I'm just letting it almost hover through those areas. And that seems to generate a lot of strikes. The next one is potentially what I would consider the best all around bait. Uh, the problem is it's really tough to fish. And I like to only do it if I know I'm around fish that are a little higher up, suspended a little higher up. And at the same time, I know that they're pretty aggressive fish, and that's a weightless wacky rig. This is a Berkeley Maxent, the general 5-inch, just stick worm. I love to fish a weightless wacky rig for suspended fish. Now, having said that, again, if they're down 20 feet, it can be a tough bait to use, especially if you have either current or wind conditions. But the reality is they respond really well to this, and this bait sinks so slowly that it's going to stay in that strike zone for a long period of time. And you can keep it there, meaning, you can count it down to when it's 10 feet down. And at that point, if that's deeper than you want to be fishing it, you can reel it in and let it fall, and count it down again to keep it in that strike zone. Definitely a great bait. We all know that a weightless wacky rig is a great shallow bait. The fish have a hard time refusing it. Well, out in that open water, the ones that are suspended have a hard time refusing it as well. I think the biggest factor with this is the angler has to have a ton of patience, and a lot of anglers don't have that patience to be able to fish this out in open, deep water. But the weightless waggy rig is still a must, in my opinion, anytime you're fishing suspended fish. The next one is going to be a lipless. This is a Berkeley War Pig, one of my favorites to be fishing out for those suspended fish. The reason I love this bait is it's loud enough to attract fish from a pretty good distance away. It's easy enough to keep at a certain depth, meaning you can fish this thing down and keep it down in 20 feet of water if you want. But it does a really good job at creating those reaction strikes out of the fish. A lot of times I'm not just straight retrieving it. I may burn it, stop it, burn it, stop it. I may yo-yo it. I may almost stroke it. It's not necessarily going off the bottom, but I'm going to be ripping it hard. And it's a really good bait for triggering those fish to strike. The same thing could be said for fishing a crankbait. The reason I like to go with a lipless, though, over a lot of other crankbaits is the crankbait's going to run at a specific depth, meaning, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and the fish are at 15 feet down over 50 feet of water, well, then you can choose a 15-foot running crankbait and it will work well. The problem is if you're seeing fish suspended at 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet, I need a bunch of different crankbaits in order to run that at the specific depth that the fish are at. With a lipless, I can get one bait to run from the surface all the way down to a deep water level. And that's where I like throwing the war pig. It's just one of those things that triggers fish to biting. It's a really good one too if you have aggressive fish around bait fish. So if they're busting bait fish or chasing bait fish, you see them on your 2D where they're streaking through the bait fish. When you have that, a lipless is a great way to generate those strikes. The last one, again, has to do with what I said earlier, where a lot of times the fish are going to be pushing the bait fish to the surface. Generally speaking, I feel like the fish that are higher up in the water column are going to be easier to catch because they're generally more aggressive fish. They're generally more in an active feeding mode. And that's where I feel like you got to go with a topwater. This is a Vixen, Reaction Innovations Vixen. One of my favorite topwaters. It does a great job at calling fish from long distances. Very loud bait, has a lot of sound, makes a lot of commotion. Does a great job at just drawing those fish from deeper water. So, if you're fishing specifically a body of water that has a really good water visibility, good water clarity, at that point, do not be afraid to throw a topwater. Even in the middle part of the day with the sun out shining bright, if there are fish that are down 10 or 15 feet and they can hear this thing or see this thing, they are not afraid to come up and eat it. Especially if you're talking about smallmouth or spotted bass, they'll really come up and eat a topwater all day long. But the reality is, these fish are looking up. They're looking towards the surface of the water. They're going to chase bait fish to the surface. And if you've got a walking style topwater bait, a lot of times those fish have a really hard time refusing that. And it's a really good way to trigger those suspended fish to come and bite something. It's just, one of the keys to a topwater bait is it's almost that illusion or that silhouette of a dying bait fish that just triggers the fish to instantly go nuts and go after it. Now, I will say one thing that I do find is if you get them to bite, to commit to that bait, and they do not get it, generally speaking, they will not come back a second time. I'm almost much better off always throwing that wacky rig as a follow-up bait and letting it just slowly fall through that water column. And generally speaking, I feel like the fish will come back and hit the wacky rig, but they a lot of times do not come back and hit the top water. And I think that's just because if they're coming from 10 or 15 feet down, they come up so quick, explode on the bait, and shoot right back down the deeper water. Where if they don't have it, they lose sight of it and they're done with it. But if you let that wacky rig fall back as a follow-up bait, a lot of times they can't resist that. So those are my baits. Those are the baits. If I'm chasing suspended fish, those are the baits I'm gonna start with. Now there's a bunch of other good baits out there that you can utilize to catch suspended fish, but for me, these are the ones that I feel most comfortable with. So let me know in the comment section, what are some of the ones that you guys love to throw so that other viewers can learn from you guys. And thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.